Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Acorn Grove.
Welcome to the Wealth and Income Podcast.
Nailed it.
Ta-da! All right, so today we have a new topic for you guys. This is something that we talk about a lot in our office, and we're kind of going to do a mashup between I'm not sure if I can build generational wealth and why people work really hard to build generational wealth, and then within 3 generations, it's gone.
Right. Yeah, and it's such a mindset problem of like, I think at the very beginning of that's not me. I'm not Rockefeller, Schwab, whatever, some
I'm not a
fancy person.
billionaire.
I'm
Yeah.
not a billionaire. I'm not Elon Musk or something, right? So let's walk through a little bit of that because I think sometimes that income, what we call the income game, is a really good level set for where people are. And I think most of the people that we meet are actually further ahead than they think.
Mm-hmm.
But we've met people that are making millions of dollars a year or 500 grand a year, $250,000 a year. You pick a number. It doesn't matter what the number is. Everybody that I know that's in that space, whether they're making 50K a year or 500 a year or a million a year, they all feel like money's
Paycheck to
tight.
paycheck.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Like,
Yeah.
man, I'm a couple of months away from making a bad choice and we're all going to be homeless, kind of
Uh-huh.
fear in the back of their brains, right?
Well, and I think this is interesting too. So I had the opportunity to do a speaking engagement last week and we played this game live. And I think the psychology behind this is really important because it's easy to overthink your answers as we jump into playing this.
Right.
The purpose of playing this game is to help you get in touch with your like subconscious or gut feeling about your ability to build wealth.
Right.
So as we play this game, I want you to worry less about whether your answers are accurate and pay more attention to your gut when we ask these questions. So don't try and logic your way out of it. I just want you to think about like the first number that pops into your head. Don't overanalyze this.
Right.
Don't try and do that because what we're trying to identify and what we're trying to help you identify is your beliefs about where you fall in the wealth stratosphere because
Right.
those beliefs are going to impact and determine the types of choices that you make and the types of financial solutions that you look for.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of my favorite games.
So, Eric, why don't you kick us off? If you're listening, we're going to go through all of this. But if you want to actually see the visuals for this, you can
Right.
jump over to the YouTube channel. And I think actually on Apple Podcasts, you can get the visuals too, if you're like
Yep.
on your iPad and that sort of thing. So
You want to
either,
start bottom up or top down?
yeah, let's start at the lower tier here.
Okay. So we want to start at what I would call the 50% tier. And what that means is as a household income, so not just mom, not just dad, but like as a household income, how much do you have to earn in the United States in order to be in the top 50% of households for income? That means half the people earn less than you every year and half the people earn more than you. So if you're at the midpoint, if you're 50%, how much you're earning per year. So just put that in your brain, think through what that would be.
Right. So I think, again, don't overanalyze this. If
Right.
you're reaching for your phone right now and you're starting to Google the answer, you're doing it incorrectly. Because what we're looking for is just the first number that pops into your head. And remember that a household can be a single person in their 20s, a
Correct.
single person in their 60s, or it could be a couple living together. It could be a couple with kids or without kids. It's just one household unit.
Right.
So again, don't overthink that, but know that the numbers could be a single earner or dual earners as you're going through and making your guesses. So just hold that number in your head.
Yeah.
And then we're going to move to the 25%. So
Yeah.
what do you think a household has to earn in order to be in the top 25% of all American households?
And
That means,
remember, 75% of the people make less than this number, and as a way to think through it.
right. And this is just for the United States. So we aren't thinking about the whole world here. It's in the
Right.
United States.
Right. Right. So
And then
hold
now
that.
that Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah, so hold that number, and then now we're going to go to kind of that top 10%. So if you're making more money every year than 90% of the US population, what does that household income look like?
It's a pretty big number.
Yeah, I mean it seems daunting, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then now the top 5%. So you're making more money every year as an income for a household than 95% of the people in the US,
The
95% of the
entire
house.
US population.
Yeah,
And the last number that we want you to kind of guess at is the top 1% of all households in the country. So the one percenters, the ones that get talked about on the news all the time, the
right,
Oprah Winfrey's, the Jeff Bezoses of the world,
right.
Elon Musk. I mean, you think about that 1%, think of whoever comes to mind, and then mark your threshold right there. And then we're going to do a little reveal here.
That's right.
And we're going to start at the bottom with that 50% mark. So half of the households in the US make below 42,184 a year.
Yeah. So
And
if you're
these,
making 43 grand, you were in the top 50%.
right. And this could be single income households or dual income households. This could be, a 20-something-year-old in their first job, or it could be a married couple with 6 kids.
Right. Right.
The 20,
25%.
the 25% mark starts at 85,853. So if as a household you are earning more than 85,853, you're in the top 25% of all households in the United States.
What about the top 10?
152, 321.
That's
So if you're making above 152 a year, you're in the top 10% of all earners in the country. And that could be your income by itself, or it could be you and a spouse.
well, and it's funny because as I've played this game 100 times, right? Probably more than that now. And every time I play it, I try to forget because I don't remember all the numbers every day. I always have to look them up. But I
Mhm.
was trying to think through, okay, well, if I didn't know the numbers and I'm just thinking through, all right, what would I need to make in the top to be in the top 50%? That was my number. I thought, I bet top 50% is about 150. That
When you
seems to
first did this,
well, like when we just did it just now, it was kind of like just playing the game along in my head as we were going. And I
right?
thought, okay, top 50%, that's probably like 150 grand a year to be in
Mhm.
that range. And I know the numbers, right? But it's just thinking through it, that's kind of the gut reaction that I had on that side.
Right. Well,
So,
and I think that's key what you just said, Eric, because you might know logically that the number is one thing, but if your gut is like, I think I'm middle of the road, right? That's something to pay a lot of attention to,
right,
because that gut feeling is going to influence whether or not you believe you can actually build real wealth.
right, right, exactly. So what about the top five?
The top 5 starts at 220, 521. So if you make over 220,000 as a household, that puts you in the top 5% of all households in the entire United States, which means that you're earning more than 95% of the entire US population. And now the big reveal, the
Top
1%
one.
starts at 548, 336.
Right,
550,000 puts you into that top 1%.
right. And so really the Bezos, the Oprah Winfrey's, the Elon Musk's, the whoever you want to, whatever sort of uber wealthy is not even close to the top 1%. It's the top
Oh,
0.00001,
yeah.
right? Um,
Well, and I think the media really influences a lot of this. It was interesting to me when we played this game last week live with an audience,
right,
because the audience actually worked for a large financial services company, but it was sort of their corporate employees, not necessarily the financial advisors, the ones who are doing the actual logistics of running the business. And at the end of it, I asked for a show of hands about, did this change anyone's perception? And I would say probably 80% of the audience raised their hand.
yeah,
And I said, leave your hand in the air if you now believe you have a real chance at building wealth and you didn't before we played this game. And almost every hand stayed in the air. Because a lot of times, even though we're making a healthy income, because we don't know how that compares at a greater scale, we discount what it is we're actually doing because of the way we feel trying to manage a budget on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Well, there's another component to that that I think is really important. And there was a great book. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it. There was a great book called Grit, written by a woman named Angela Duckworth. And
Mhm.
she said, you know, a lot of times whenever we're looking at athletes or people that are kind of at the top of their field, it's a really easy thing for us to say, well, they're at the top of the field because they're just really talented,
Mhm.
right? And that, well, they're just, God gave them gifts that he didn't give anybody else, and they're there because of that. And she says, but if you really look at the people that are really successful in that industry, whatever their industry is, talent plays a little bit, but grit counts much more than talent did, right?
It's
And
discipline, it's
it's
motivation, it's
right. But when we think it's talent, it's a way to let ourselves off the hook because it's like, well, I'm just not talented like they are. And so whenever I look at that number, that and that list, and that, you know, to be in the top 50%, I need to make whatever that is, 43 grand, and top 25 or top 10% was 150, and so on, right? In that list. The moment that I find and I know where my numbers are in relationship to the world, there's a gut check that comes with that. And I think it's hard when you first see those numbers and it's like, oh, I'm required to do more. Like I
uh-huh.
can't just go, well, I'm average, I'm below average, I don't have the skills to go do that. It's like, nope, you're actually pretty far above average from what you think you're at. And because of that, you get some work to do. Like you
You
can't
got to
coast.
own
Like
it.
you got to own it now, and you got to go do something with it versus just saying, "Well, I'm average, just like everybody else." It's like, no, you're not. And so I think there's a component there that's really neat because it's like I can do more, but then there's a component there that's like I need to do more. I need to live up to my potential, which I think is a cool thing in that chart.
So as I was preparing for the speaking engagement last week, and I spent some time looking online, attempting to find income levels across the world because I thought the comparison would be really interesting. And I didn't find any particular data that I thought was like truly conclusive, but I did find kind of a range that was consistent across everything that I was looking for and the different research models and calculations. And what I thought was really interesting, I found an international organization that focuses on charitable giving. And
Oh,
so they were giving, if this is your income, this is where you fall, in order to, I think, encourage giving to those
yeah.
less fortunate. And what I thought was really interesting on that particular website was that it said if you look at income levels across the entire world, if you're a single earner with no kids and you make $85,000 a year, that puts you in the top 1% of the entire world. And so if we think about that in the context of, what we just went through, if you're in the top 25% of the United States, you're potentially in the top 1% of the world. Now, it allowed us to kind of customize some of the data. So I put in married with 2 kids just to see how that changed things.
Right.
And it said that for that type of household, you're in the top 9%
At 85.
at 85,000 if you're married
Yeah.
with 2 kids. So I thought it was kind of an interesting way to break all of it down because it was really looking at the amount of money per person in your household as opposed to
Yeah.
just by earner or by the household total. But I thought that was really interesting because if you're in the top 1 to 10% at 85,000 a year in the entire world, that's pretty amazing.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't think most people making 85 a year are like, yeah, man, I'm killing it. Like that's not the
Right.
response that I get from them when we are talking to people about how do you feel about your income. I mean, frankly, even when we talk to people who are making 500,000 a year, they're like, yeah, I'm doing okay. And I'm like, what? Let me
Right.
reset how you're framing yourself and your accomplishments here, because this is a really big deal. And I think part of what becomes really important with this is that when you listen to talking heads who are saying, this is what you need to do, I think it's also important to know
Mm,
where you fall to understand if the advice being given is actually relevant for you. Because a lot of
right.
times, if it is selling budgeting software or making ends meet when there's zero fluff in your budget and you don't have upward potential, you make decisions that become about making sure you don't go broke, as opposed to making decisions that actually allow you to become truly wealthy. And I would argue that if your household is making 85,000 or above, you have the potential to become truly wealthy, to spend more money during your lifetime, and to
Right.
leave more money to the next generation.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant component of that is if I'm barely making ends meet and I don't see myself in the proper order of where I am income wise, right?
Mhm.
Then in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I keep going back to that stupid pyramid, right? I'm thinking in scarcity mode. I'm thinking I gotta pay the bills and I'm not diminishing the feeling because it doesn't matter how much you make, everybody has that feeling, right? Man, I got to pay the bills, and are we going to be able to send the kids to school? And like all of these things are right here. Very few people I know have the ability to think 20 or 30 years out, or 50 or 60 years out on what life could be because they can't imagine themselves there.
Right. So
Right.
I think there's two things from what you just said. The first is, if you're listening right now and you're making over 85,000,
Right.
is own that you are already in a phenomenal place at a worldwide level, even if that feeling is not there at the
Right.
moment. And then recognize that if you are kind of on that Maslow's hierarchy and you're playing defensively, you're never actually going to build anything because you aren't thinking about building out an offense. You're just thinking
Right.
about holding tight,
Survival. Yeah.
survival. Right. And so the moment you open yourself to the idea that you can build something that is bigger and better for yourself and for your family, you will start to look for the opportunities to do that. Whereas when you are in that scarcity mode, like you just said, Eric, you don't even look for those things because you
Yeah.
don't believe those things are meant for you. So I just want everybody listening for just a moment to pat themselves on the back, to recognize where they fall, and to own their own potential for
Right.
true wealth during their lifetime. And I hope that you'll take this moment and say, okay, how do I actually do this? What resources do I need? What
Right.
mentors do I need to help guide me in this direction? And
Yeah.
if that's all you get from today, I would consider that to be a huge win.
Yeah. Well, it's that, what is that? What do they call it? The reticular activating system, right? I'm
Huh?
gonna
Yeah.
botch it, right? I like it's sort of training your mind to go think through what might be possible versus sort of being stuck in that moment, right? And sort of being able to broaden that out.
Well, and if you've never heard that phrase, reticular activating system, before, it's the idea that once your brain sees something or latches onto something, it will start seeing it all the time, even if you never
Right.
noticed it before. So if the easiest way to explain this is when you buy a new car, maybe you didn't
Right.
notice that that car was driving around a whole lot, but as soon as you buy, a white Toyota Camry, all you see is white Toyota Camrys. You see them
Right.
everywhere all of a sudden.
Right.
So it's the idea that you can train your brain to look for the things that are important, as opposed to filtering things out as noise. But you have to first identify, this is what I want, and then you're going to start to see it everywhere.
Right. Right. And I think that idea of and we've talked about this a little bit before, but I think this will help sort of transition us. The best way to build wealth is to think in decades and generations, not years.
Right.
And if you can see yourself as a generational player and that you're the starting point of another generation and the generation after that, and not just like creating babies, but like making sure those babies are set up and wealthy and doing well, then
Mhm.
I think it makes that it kind of trains the reticular activating system to think in the right framework. And
Mhm.
then it makes it easy to back into, okay, what do I need to do today to make that happen?
And I want to add one more thing to RAS, the reticular activating system. There's a lot of stuff, and I know I'm going to get an eye roll probably from you, Eric, on this, because
Sure.
you're the engineer and I'm the one that skews a little bit more woo-woo. But if you think about this idea that's really popular right now, the idea of like manifesting wealth,
Right.
the science behind that is the reticular activation system.
Right.
It's that once you focus on something, you start seeing more of it. And when you see more of it, it's easier to push yourself into that direction. So if you ever heard that word manifesting and you found yourself rolling your eyes at it, there is actually some science that pushes
Right.
things into that particular direction, right? It's just sometimes when we hear that word, we're like, oh,
Right.
come on,
Yeah,
right?
the
But
scientists call it reticular activating. The hippies call it manifesting. It's like it's all kind of the same thing.
whatever you want to call it, it gets you to the same place, right?
That's right.
Okay, so now that we're at the place where we realize we can actually build true wealth, I think we have to recognize that if you do what everybody else is doing, you get what everybody else gets.
Right.
And so if you think about how many people really have the potential to build true wealth, most of them are not doing it because they are not actually, putting themselves into the space where they say, yes, I own it. I can be wealthy. I will be wealthy. I'm going to make decisions to go in that direction. And so let's talk a little bit about that particular piece.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it is having that mindset around that I want to go do it. I mean, I think that to me that is the single biggest thing you can do
Mm-hmm.
is I'm not average because I've seen the data. I've got to stop playing average.
Right. I have to look at what people have done or what they can do, and I need to be able to make those decisions for myself. And I think there is it's interesting. So the group that sponsored my talk was a diversity, equity, and inclusion group, but the talk was for the entire organization. And I've had a couple of times people who kind of fall into the DEI categories, whether it's women or minorities, tell me they feel like the deck is stacked against them, that they don't have access to information. But I think some of that may be accurate. And I don't want to discount privilege and all of those sorts of things. But I also think there is an element of when you believe that you do not have access to information, you look for ways to prove it.
Yeah.
And I think opening yourself to the idea that we have this whole wide world of internet and, the ability to meet with experts who are not in our city. You can meet with people who are all over the country. You can take time at night to watch, a YouTube video and start to digest, is this fact or is this opinion? You can look for people who have modeling systems that allow you to see, if I do it this way, what's my outcome versus if I do it this way, what's my outcome? And
Right.
understanding that shouldn't just be about what happens to my net worth, but what happens to my ability to spend income and what happens to my ability to set up the next generation as well. And that, I think, that degree of empowerment is so key, regardless of where you're starting, because it's not as hard as people want you to think.
Yep.
And any advisor who tries to, or influencer that tries to create a sense of dependency on them specifically is doing that out of their own sense of scarcity, right? And
Right.
so I think that modeling part of it is one of the most key pieces, is modeling how does this change my income and how does this change my legacy? And if you prioritize income first, it will automatically flow into more liquidity, and
Yep.
that will automatically flow into more legacy. But that has to be the order that you rank things in. How is this impacting my ability to take income, right? And then liquidity, and then legacy.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think from a mindset standpoint, maybe there, and because I wanted to go back to something you said that I thought was really good. Maybe there is something that's pushing back against you, that there's you don't have access to the information. Whatever resistance you're feeling on that side of it, it may actually be real.
Right.
But if your mindset is, I can figure this out and I'm going to push through it, that's a way better mindset to start out with than I should just go sit in a cave and like
Right.
it's all over with. There's nothing I can do. I'm not empowered. I don't have the skills and the capability to move beyond it.
Everything
From
is figure outable.
everything that's important can be figured out, right? Everything that has to happen can be figured out. And so I just think that mindset is such a big deal to overcome a lot of those things.
Right.
Um,
That's the beauty of this country, I
yeah, I mean,
think,
that's it,
is that
right?
no matter where you started from, you can finish wherever you want to. For
Right.
some, it may be harder than others to get to that point, but you can push through and anything is possible.
Yeah. Well, and the only limitation is the ones you put on yourself, not the ones that other people put on you, right? And if you start out with, I can do this, then everything else kind of becomes at
You
least
will
figure
find a way to
outable.
do it if you
Yeah.
believe you can.
Right.
And I like that, Eric. I think that's a really good point. So I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of what happens at a generational level.
Yeah.
So if we make the assumption that you have now owned that you can truly be wealthy, one of the things that I hear people say, especially if they personally have not inherited money, is I don't want to leave money to my kids because it will probably ruin them.
Probably.
Probably, right? So this is also interesting. So same speaking engagement. I asked, show of hands, how many of you believe that your life would immediately get worse if you suddenly came into $1 million? One person raised their hand. And I was
Somebody
like,
did?
somebody raised their hand. I was like, what? Your life would get worse if you needed $1 million? So I said, help me understand that. Give me like, why would your life get worse? And her response was, well, I don't think it would really fix anything. I need $10 million. And I was like, okay, you just want a bigger number. Well, don't we all, right? But it wasn't that the $1 million would make her life worse. It was that she didn't think it would materially improve it.
Got it. It just wasn't enough. Then there was
She
not enough
wanted more.
zeros.
Right.
Right.
She wanted more zeros. She was like, I'm not settling. I'm looking for potential now. I'm not settling. So I thought that was really
Well,
kind of
good
funny.
on her for
I was a
that.
little, yeah, I was a little taken aback when somebody raised their hand. I wasn't expecting that reaction, but it ended up being a fun talking point. So here's the thing. Almost none of us believe that our life. Now, if we won $400 million in the lottery, that might be a different situation because
Sure.
a lot of times when people win the lottery, they aren't prepared for that kind of money.
Right.
So part of this is about preparation. And I think so I'm going to give a couple of statistics real quick. And they're going to be real broad numbers. Most people don't inherit money until they're in their mid to late 50s or later. So think for a minute about just the age gap between you and your parents.
Right.
Most of the time, our parents are graduating from the planet about the time that we are getting ready to retire, either just before, during, or just after,
Right.
is generally the time period where the money shows up. So I think when we have this idea of this much money would ruin my children, it's the idea of like both my spouse and I are going to kick the bucket and my 18-year-old's going to get a check.
Right.
That's not usually what happens.
It could happen, but generally not.
Well, and if that is the eventuality and you have planned for it, you can put parameters around how your
Right.
child can actually access the money by setting up a trust. So
Right.
I want to make the assumption that you have the ability, if your children inherit money at a young age, to parent from beyond the grave using legal means.
Right. You get X dollars when you're this age. You get another set of cash when you're at 10 years older, so that
You
you
have to
can
take a
stretch it.
drug test in order to get access to the money.
Right.
Or what my dad did, you have to kiss an 8x10 glossy picture of my face and say, thank you, Dad, in order to get a distribution. I mean, you can write whatever you want into a trust to
Right.
make sure that there are parameters around how your children would actually access money.
Right.
You could demand that they be employed, right? I mean, there's just any number of things that you can do there. But I think the idea, we've all heard the phrase poverty begets poverty.
Right.
A large portion of that is mindset. So if
Yep.
your mindset is nobody helped me and I turned out just fine, and so you're not going to help the next generation, you should own right now in this moment that you're kind of perpetuating a lack of abundance.
Right. Well, and there's a great book. There's some math behind this, but there's a great book called Anchorman by a guy named Steve Farrar, and he's passed away since. But he says it was a book for guys, but I think for women and families it holds true. He says you're the product of 3 to 4 generations in your past. Like who you are as a person is influenced at least 3 generations back, if not 4. And so whatever your view of money, whatever your view of whatever it is probably 60 to 70 years old at minimum.
Hmm.
And so I think that idea of nobody helped me out, turned out fine, blah, 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 is scarcity. And that probably came from your parents or their parents or their parents.
Hmm.
But the impact you have now can also leap forward three,
It can
four
change
generations in the
what
future.
happens.
Right.
Right. Right. And I think that money without the education, that's where there's danger. Because
Correct.
if you are not appropriately prepared to receive a large sum of money, then you may just blow it all. But if you are, because your parents have modeled it for you and have taught you and have had open conversation, then you can change the trajectory of the generations that come beyond. And I think that sort of open conversation is part of what you're doing. I
Yeah.
know in our household, we have very candid conversations about what is happening with our money. When money is tight, we talk about why. When money is flush, we talk about why. And my kids have been managing their own budgets for years. They're 12 and 9 right now, but
Yeah.
they get a weekly allowance and then they have additional chores they can do to earn more money. And that's their money. So they get to decide what they do with that. And so they're already doing that, but they also are participating with us as we're investing in real estate, as we're investing in the stock market, as we're funding our insurance contracts. All of these things are open dialogue because
Right.
I want them to have a head start.
Yeah.
And that mindset, I think, begins to change when you do things differently. And I've told this example before, but I'm going to tell it again because it is an example of how the mindset, when you start thinking generationally, becomes different. If I think about how most people are funding college education, is put money in a 529. And I
Right.
don't have any problems with a 529 plan. We have lots of clients who,
Yep.
love their 529 plans. But when you think about what you're really doing in a 529 plan, you are funding a bucket of money that you are going to give away because you get some tax incentives for how you give it away.
Right.
But ultimately, you build up this bucket and then you pour it out. And what you end up with is a kid that has a college education and hopefully no debt. And that feels really good. But it may or may not
Right.
be the most efficient way to actually do that. And so if I think about kind of that shift in mindset, what I'm doing for my children and have been since they were 15 days old is funding a whole life insurance policy. And
Yep.
as Emily turns 13 and kind of moves into her teenage years, the expectation is that she will use a portion of that money to go and buy some form of rental property or income producing asset. So that could be real estate. It could be other things that we have access to, but let's assume it's the real estate route.
Right.
So she takes the rent from the real estate and she uses that to pay back the loan she took from her insurance policy. And if she repeats that process 2 or 3 times before she goes to school, then the rental properties themselves are going to pay her college tuition. So when she graduates from college, she has all the cash in the insurance contract. She
Right.
has the equity in the real estate. She has the rental income from the real estate, and she has a college degree with no debt. So if we really start to look at how the same dollars can do something very different, that mindset shift of I'm going to build my money and then assign very little value to it and give it away
Right.
versus I want to build something that's going to be there for the long haul that will create wealth for my child. Totally
Right.
different situation. And you could do this differently if you aren't ready to do that with your kids. You be the one who buys the real estate so
Right.
that when your kid gets out of college, they maybe are starting to build from scratch, but you still have all the cash value. You have the rental income. You have those things because what you do models for your children what they should do.
Right. Well, and I think that's a good, and I know we're coming up on time, but I think that's a really good, like simple question to know if you're making those kind of choices. And it's what you and I used to call, and we still do, double duty dollars, right? That idea of how many uses of am I getting for this money? And in a 529, it's a perfect example, right? You're putting money in a box, you're letting the box grow, and then you're pouring the dollars out, right? On that side. Sorry, somebody's
Mhm.
that's a $1 one use thing. right? There's no acceleration, there's no legacy, there's nothing out on the other end. But what you talked about was 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different uses on the same dollar over and over again, right? And to your point, you may not get 6 uses out of the same dollar. But if you picked up 2 or 3 in one strategy versus another that was giving you one, then you're on the right track. I mean, I think that's, and it, to me, that's sort of the mindset starts to move into strategy is how many uses of every dollar am I getting on this particular solution? And it's an easy, quick way to think that.
To that point, I think as we've been on podcasts, you've said a couple of times, like being the landlord is not really your jam, right? And
Yeah,
so even though you do it, like you're not like, yes, I get to do these things. And I
I
think
have a
sometimes
property manager now, and
so you don't have to deal with it, right? And so here's the thing. Even if you don't want to move into real estate or you don't want to become a property manager, there are still strategies that make things more efficient and get you down the line. And they're
right.
all provable and they're all things that you can model and you can see the exact impact of that. So if you're having an aha moment for the first time and you're like, no, I'd like to learn more about this, give us a DM,
Yeah,
right? Reach out to us on social media so that you could say, hey, I'd like to know how I can take these next steps. And we will absolutely help you figure that out. So if you're looking for me, you can find me at The Wealth Woman. Eric, where can they find you?
you can find me at Economics with Eric wherever you use social media.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Specific financial concepts and advanced strategies are presented to you for educational purposes only. We cannot and do not guarantee their applicability to your individual circumstance. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals on all financial matters.
Provided content is for overview and is not intended and should not be relied upon as individualized tax, legal, fiduciary, or investment advice. Neither Wealth Woman, Acorn Grove, or the Wealth and Income Podcast, nor their representatives provide tax or legal advice. For answers to specific questions and before making any decision, please consult a qualified attorney or tax advisors.
All numeric examples and any individual shown are hypothetical and were used for explanatory purposes only. Actual results may vary.
Investing involves risk, which includes potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company.
Life insurance should be purchased by individuals that have a need to provide a death benefit to protect others with insurable interests in their lives against financial loss. Life insurance is not a retirement plan, investment, or savings account.
Not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or any governmental agency. Insurance and investment products, not a deposit, not FDIC or NCUA insured, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by any bank or credit union, may lose value.
Please visit the Wealth Woman website disclosure page for other important disclosures.